mask, that COVID
Hey, y'all, gravity. Any day above ground, live it.
mask, surgical mask. We're joining live with Channel 2's Mark Winnie, who's live on the scene.
So
Mark, what have you been able to figure out about this
Hang on.
active shooter situation now?
So before we start this Fed report, as y'all know, there's an active shooter down here in Atlanta. It's downtown, midtown, and apparently one person has passed away, 4 injured. So yeah, midtown Atlanta is a little bit messed up right now. But let's see what they talking about.
Was injured. This is a very fluid situation, for, of course, for APD as well as for us, but wanted to get that information to you that the mothers of the suspect, were being told by APD, ran from the scene. Do not know if she was injured, but we are told she was not shot. So I imagine that as we piece this together as the day goes on and we learn more about what is behind this shooting, that will fit in someplace. Just want to show you how active this scene remains to be. There is a police officer on this corner on Spring Street. A lot of law enforcement continues to be arriving and moving around. David LaVecchia, if you'll come back this way with me, we've sensed really no loss in the sense of, and look, that's the Fulton County Police SWAT team, I believe. I see U.S. Marshal actually on the back of the vest of one of those folks that just went by. So that gives you a sense that law enforcement is still very much concerned about the possibility the active shooter is in this area. But again, we reported earlier, they were running down reports, unconfirmed reports about the possibility, essentially, of him being seen elsewhere. So what that means is you need to avoid this area. If you know who that person is, call 911. If you have any information where he may be, if you see that person, call 911. By all means, and based on my experience, I would say police would tell you, do not approach this person, but call.
But they got guns down here, so what's up? Let's get it popping.
Based on what has happened so far, that phone call
from the picture they showed, he looked black or Latino. So it is
that's the latest we've got right now. Police continuing to move around this scene. We'll be back to you as soon as we have another update. Reporting live, Mark Winnie, Channel 2 Action News.
Mark, that's very interesting that the suspect's potential mother ran away from the scene, because you would think that she could be a source of information about not only, of course, who he is, but perhaps his state of mind, what was happening that led up to this. I wonder if you have any more to say about that, or what the investigative process would be from there.
Well, I didn't drill down on this, but the impression I got from what I was told was that she ran away from the scene, possibly the scene, while things were happening. Not that she was trying to avoid cooperating with law enforcement, but that she ran away. The impression I had was from the scene of the shooting. Not that she was trying to avoid cooperating with law enforcement or trying to get away herself or anything like that. Again, it's fluid. What we know is I was told that she ran from the scene. They do not know if she was injured. The person I was talking to with APD, but she was not shot. So I wouldn't read into that she is fleeing law enforcement or anything of that nature.
Absolutely not. I actually meant the opposite, that she could be helpful in the investigation, that they obviously could find out a lot more about him by talking to her.
And I would think so. And I think that's an excellent point, and I agree with you. And I think that I would imagine that is already in process. And as the facts become known to us throughout the day, how the presence of his mother at the scene figures into all of this will become more clear.
Absolutely. Channel 2's Mark Winnie, decades of experience covering situations like this in Atlanta and in North Georgia, reporting from Midtown Atlanta. As you look at this live scene, a row of flashing lights, unlike any we have ever seen in Midtown Atlanta. The response after a shooting happened about 2 hours ago in what looks like a medical office in Midtown Atlanta.
And here's once again a look at the suspect. Atlanta police providing this to us, that this is the person they believe who opened fire today shortly after noon in Midtown Atlanta. We still have what they're describing as an active shooter situation, though We also understand no shots have been fired since the initial gunfire, which 5 people apparently shot, 1 confirmed dead. The suspect is not in custody at this time. So if you think you know anything, please contact law enforcement. Here's a map. You've got multiple Channel 2 Action News reporters and photographers and all of our live capabilities trying to bring you every piece of information that we can.
Share, like, and subscribe.
It's also reminiscent, unfortunately, of what we saw last summer. It was August of 22 where we had an active shooter situation in Midtown Atlanta, if you'll recall that, where a woman shot, killed 2
Black
people,
woman, I did
and
that
injured
story.
others, a 34-year-old woman who was eventually apprehended at Atlanta's airport, ostensibly trying to get out of the country, seeking an international flight. And here we are now, May 3rd here of 2023, and we have an active shooter situation in Midtown Atlanta. Again, another live look. You see Atlanta police officers right there. We've seen SWAT. We've seen state troopers. We've seen county sheriffs. We've seen multiple ambulances and first responders of various sorts. Everybody's working today to try to understand just what's occurred and where this shooter may be.
And importantly, a big piece of this is keeping everybody else safe, making sure that the people who are in Midtown doing their jobs
right down the
today
block from the Vol City
can
hot
stay
dog
safe,
joint.
can get out safely when it is appropriate. You're watching this all unfold live as you look at these pictures from Midtown Atlanta. It's been about 2 hours since the initial report of a shooting. And I can tell you a little bit more about the area. So many people drive through this area, work in this area, go to restaurants in this area. We're talking about
Georgia Tech.
east of the downtown connector. So if you're heading north on the downtown connector, it would be on the right between the connector and Piedmont Park, in other words, south of 14th Street. So if you're familiar with some of the hotels like the Atlanta Marriott Suites, the Four Seasons, it would be south of there, in between that area and the Google Millennium Building at Midtown. So many restaurants, stores in the area,
Georgia
and
Tech.
especially, Georgia Tech in that area, Georgia Tech also to the west, Georgia State, a lot of students and professors in that area too. Now the streets have been cleared for police, for troopers, for all of the emergency response right there as they try to secure the area and make sure everyone who needs to get out can get out safely. We've seen a few people start to leave. When they initially cleared the medical building, they were even taking people out in wheelchairs for the safety of everyone involved. So if you see some people in medical outfits, they might have come from that building, 1110 West Peachtree, medical building where they worked in those medical offices right there. 4 people shot and injured, 1 person found dead at the scene in Midtown Atlanta.
Yeah, according to Atlanta police, we have 5 people shot and 1 confirmed dead at this time is the latest information that we have. As we have Channel 2 Action News reporter Mark Winnie and his decades of sources that he has with law enforcement. He is working all of the information that he possibly can. There's a non-confirmed report that, meaning the police have not said it definitively to us, that there may be a carjacking situation involved with the shooter. So we just don't know the situation in terms of a whereabouts of the person who fired these shots that, according to Atlanta police, have hit 5 people, 1 killed. So this is what we have so far today, whereas shortly after noon, right through Midtown Atlanta, everything started to change.
Took place, and she said students are expected to be on high alert. I actually just got an alert from my daycare, which is on that side of town too. They're on lockdown, asking parents not to come by and pick up. So again, this is an evolving situation for all of us. Now we want to turn to what we are working to find out. You've seen our crews out in the field. We're working to get answers to these questions that we have, we know you have, we know police have, and that includes more information on the suspect's identity. We know the picture is out there. We have shared it. It's spread on social media, and police asking anyone with any information to come forward. Obviously, we're going to be working to confirm and bring you every new detail we can in regards to that. Also, more specifics on where the shooting took place. Obviously, we know at this point that there is a relationship to Northside Hospital. Northside tweeting out in the last 10 minutes that they are cooperating with law enforcement following the shooting at the Midtown Atlanta location earlier this afternoon. They're urging people in the area to shelter in place, follow instructions from law enforcement on scene, and they follow This tragedy is affecting all of us, and we ask for patience and prayers at this time. So obviously we are thinking of those that are directly impacted, but we are still working to get some specifics on, I know we were talking about the inside of the building versus the outside of the building and crews on the scene. We're also talking about team members from Northside they were seeing exiting. The final question that we're also working on most directly right now is whether there's any potential relationship to the victims so far to the shooters.
Switch.
Long guns closer to the scene, so very much still an active situation. I was able to talk with a nurse who just left Northside Medical. She was on the second floor. From her understanding, they heard a thud, what they believe were shots in the moments right around noon, and she said she was one of the last floors that was just evacuated. She was very relieved to be able to go home. They weren't getting a lot of messages inside. She said it was just panic, just waiting, sitting there, hoping that they could leave soon. They believe that the shooting was actually happening a few floors above them. But I really do want to just set the scene of where we are. So, right, we're in Midtown. Right here is the Midtown MARTA station right here, one of them. And then if we continue to pan over, I'm going to have my photographer continue to pan over. An apartment building just about a block that way, that's where there was a shooting, an active shooter situation here in Midtown last year. So this is a very familiar panic that this community has gone through. And if you remember, in that active shooter situation, it took roughly an hour for officers has died, 3 more injured, but we're in the heart of Midtown right now. And yes, while there is somewhat of a quiet sense right now, this is not over by any means. We're continuing to get directions from law enforcement on scene to move back, forth, left, right. We're seeing SWAT continue to check out different areas, and we'll continue to monitor things here on the ground. But I just really wanted to break down where we are and how familiar the situation is here for residents, for business owners, and for those who live and work in the area. Guys, back to you.
All right, Patrick, thank you. We did just get some new information, a statement from Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens. Of course, the nation is watching right now, and most of Atlanta really focused on Midtown. Here is what Mayor Andre Dickens is saying. I am in close contact with the Atlanta Police Department as they are responding to the active shooting situation in Midtown near 1100 West Peachtree. Those in the area should shelter in place. Follow Atlanta Police for updates. Stay tuned. And that is something on social media we are certainly following here. Atlanta Police sending us updates as quickly as they can. Of course, they are out there doing their job, trying to track down this active shooter. Once again, another live look down the roadway there in Midtown Atlanta. We can see ambulances on the scene, fire trucks as well, and a number of police vehicles. A heavy, heavy police response. Again, as I mentioned, the entire nation really watching us here in Atlanta and what's unfolding in Midtown.
So this happened at a hospital, Northside Hospital, down in Midtown.
That there, and we're just getting word, interrupting myself, that we're going to get a news conference from Grady Hospital, an update at 20 after the hour, so about 7 minutes or so from now. I was just remembering, we did have a shooter in Midtown. It was last summer.
Last August.
It was last August when a woman shot and killed 2 people and then wounded a third, only to be apprehended and arrested at the airport. So police, sadly, have run this drill before less than 12 months ago. And, you know, every time there is a situation like this, there are lessons that are learned. There are postmortems after operations when police will go over what went wrong, what went right. Obviously, that was a situation where police were able to quickly get the suspect in custody. And you have to think that they learned some lessons from that shooting last August that they're putting into play today as they look for this suspect. Again, the suspect not yet apprehended, still on the loose, but he has done a lot of damage, killing 1 person and hurting 4 others. And again, as we just announced, we're going to hear from Grady Hospital, where the injured have been taken. We are expecting a press conference from Grady, an update on those patients coming up in the next 5 minutes or so.
And Rick, as you mentioned, police have run this drill before, not that long ago. And we have to keep in mind too, and we do a number of stories, this is a city filled with cameras. Cameras are everywhere, tracking moves. And we have a video integration center that Atlanta police use, and I've been inside that video integration center, and it's really unbelievable the area that this covers. So you see street corners, especially in large populated areas like downtown and midtown as well. So no doubt we have officers in that video integration center right now looking to see if they can see that suspect on the sidewalk, on the roadway, going from point A to point B, and where that person may be now. And I do believe part of that was used in tracking down that suspect last August as well.
That's right.
When you think about it, to go from Midtown Atlanta to get to the airport, you got to hit a lot of spots. And for police to be able to find that person in that instance last year, in a short amount of time, I think it was only about 4 or 5 hours, at least in that time.
Very impressive.
Right, very impressive. And fortunately, that person didn't do any more damage beyond what happened there. And we are hoping that is the case in this instance. We do want to remind you once again to avoid the area here in Midtown. Here is a map and a look at the streets that are closed right now. Streets near Northside Medical Center, West Peachtree Street Northwest between 10th and 14th Street. As our crews were covering this story earlier this afternoon, they were pushed back block after block as police tried to widen that perimeter and secure that area and make sure they had control of everything and everyone within that area so they can try and track down that suspect. Now, if you're living in the area, you're watching us, you're listening to us, you are in the safest place you can be. Shelter in place, stay where you are, avoid coming into Midtown to go back to your office. You may want to call. You may not be able to get back into your office anyway, into your apartment building, condo building. You may not be able to get back in there either. Many places are now on lockdown, including Goddard School. Goddard School is on lockdown in Midtown, no one in or out. Atlanta Public Schools says they are sheltering in place in the Midtown area as well. So certainly call ahead because it is not likely you will be able to get through to Midtown.
Zach Summers has been following this story from the very beginning. He joins us now live, still on the ground on the scene. Zach, fill us in. What have you learned?
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that they tell us they are still actively looking for this shooter, and they tell us that they are still actively looking for any other victims, which paints a very sad picture when you think about officers potentially walking floor to floor through the medical center, looking for any other possible victims as they continue to look for this shooter. This is a live look from 12th Street and West Peachtree here in Midtown Atlanta, the center of today's active shooting inside Northside Hospital. We had a chance to speak to patients earlier today as they were quickly being scurried out of the hospital, many of them crying, many of them angry, many of them confused by what was happening. These were folks who were simply going to doctor's appointments. And then to have something like this happen, we talked to a woman who was, in fact, on her way here to a doctor's appointment, and she had just missed all of this by 20 minutes. And she, was just disheartened by it, but also grateful that she was not inside and did not experience this firsthand. So, as I've said, there's a lot of emotion down here. We are waiting to hear from Atlanta police. We've been told that they're going to give us an update as to what happened out here as they continue to look for this shooter. And we're going to walk here, and we were going to talk to this couple earlier. We saw them coming out of the hospital. Let's listen in.
And then suddenly we saw the lady come from behind the counter and start locking the door inside the medical facility where we were. We were on the 9th floor. And as we heard more and saw it on television, they said the shooter was on the 11th floor. We were on the 9th floor. So they asked us to move to the back, and we moved to a room in the back, and they secured us all in the back, just waiting for someone to kind of come and get us. And they asked us to shelter in place. So we just sheltered in place and followed directions. But we didn't really know what was going on until we saw the television, but we did hear some popping noise that we didn't know what the popping noise was. So originally we just ignored it and just kept waiting for my son was inside the procedure room. And Doris, were you in the procedure room? She was in the procedure room and I was in the waiting area. So when we heard the popping, it was really nothing until we saw everyone locking doors and scurrying through the doctor's office. And then they put the television on and we saw the breaking news on the television, and they mentioned that it was that address. So it was surprising that it was in the same building that we were in. Right?
And you mentioned hearing popping noise. Was it rapid fire? Was it a lot?
Yeah, it was. It wasn't a lot. It was a few, like a few single popping. You know, it just sounded like maybe someone's motorcycle backfired or something. But we could hear it out of the window, and then we heard fire engines driving. I looked out of the window of the 9th floor, and I could see fire engines moving. I could hear the sirens, but at that point, I had no idea what it was. We just thought something was going on outside.
And
What was that realization like for you, the moment that you realized there was an active shooter in your building?
For me, I immediately started thinking about the people that were around me because there was a lot of nervousness, as you can imagine. The staff was scurrying everywhere, so I just wanted to make sure people stayed calm. Because when things like this happen, a lot of times you can make it worse by just being too overactive. So we just kind of kept people calm. And everyone waited and started looking at their phones, trying to look for some type of indicator of what was going on. So fortunately, the headlines came on the TV pretty quick. And then we had a pretty good idea of what was going on. But we were really just trying to keep everyone in the medical office just calm so that they didn't overreact. And the medical staff did a great job. They found a secure area in the back of the facility where we were on the 9th floor, and they moved us all in the back area and took care of us. So my applause to that your son, Doris.
Thank you.
did you not know that, sir? Did you not know that young woman?
No.
So, and you stayed with her.
Yes.
Why?
This is what we do, man. We're people. Yeah.
That's a dick question to ask.
She's in there with an MRI, and they shut down the elevators. So we were on the 9th floor. We had to walk down 9 flights of stairs, and she was walking with a cane. So we wasn't going to let her walk.
And you said you were on the 9th floor. You were told the shooter's on the 11th floor.
Yeah.
What did you ever fear for your life while you were up there?
No. No, you just got to try to keep your head. And there was no immediate threat to us. So the idea was to keep our head, make sure that the immediate people around me, that they had their heads and we weren't overreacting and creating a more worse situation than it was. So I think the people were doing pretty good at keeping calm. But you can imagine what that environment was like in that medical center. Everyone getting messages, they're sending messages, they're hearing rumors, they're hearing this. So it worked out for the best, I guess, for that particular crew. Unfortunately, I heard that there were some people who got shot, and they eventually said they got shot on the 11th floor. So that heightened some of the anxieties because we were thinking, okay, if they're on the 11th floor, we're only 2 floors down, so what's next? But the medical staff got us in a nice area back there, secured us, kind of put us away. So everything worked out for the best.
And as you were being escorted out of the building, can you kind of paint a picture of what you were seeing?
Yeah, I can tell you, no one came to get us at first, so we were waiting. And we looked across and outside the door, it looked like all the other medical offices were vacant. So we were like the only ones left in there, it seems like. And then we heard the elevator door ding. And everyone who was sitting in the lobby, when we heard the elevator door ding, you could imagine there were some tense seconds there. And then all of a sudden the SWAT team just kind of jumped out of the elevator. We saw it was the right people. So for a split second, when that elevator dinged, we didn't know who was coming off the elevator. And then the SWAT team came off the elevator and they opened the door. They got everybody, pushed us to the stairwell, escorted us down the stairs. Yeah, it was intense. Yeah, a little bit intense. I could see the concern on a lot of people's faces. I'm a retired military person, so for me, my instincts were stay calm, think your way through it, make sure you can have a clear head in case we have to do anything to save ourselves. But there was some tense moments up there. There were some nervous people.
What's your name, sir?
KJ Johnson.
Thank you, KJ. And thank you for helping that woman.
Oh, my pleasure. We shouldn't have to be thanked for that, man. We're humans, and when you see people in need, that should be a natural instinct for us. And several people tried to reach out and help them, but I wanted them to go ahead and get out of the building, and I just stayed with her to make sure she got safe.
Absolutely. Thank you, KJ. Yeah, I think what really stuck with me is him recounting that moment when they're on the 9th floor and they hear the ding of the elevator. Can you imagine? I mean, you don't know who's coming off that elevator. Fortunately, it was SWAT who escorted him. And you saw the woman he was with earlier. He didn't even know that woman, but he saw that she was scared. So he took it upon himself to walk with her out of the hospital until her loved one grabbed her here at 12th.
I guess y'all don't do Southern
just,
hospitality no more.
it's an incredible story of just people being people in such a stressful and scary environment. Tracy, Rick?
Yeah.
Boo this man!
For that woman, I know for me, he would be my hero. Someone
Absolutely.
that doesn't know you, willing to take the time to make sure you was safe.
What the hell?
What the hell? What the?
We are waiting for a press conference at Grady Memorial Hospital that is about, we're told, to get underway. We believe the doctors are walking up to the microphone. We're hoping to get an update on the injured here. As we've been reporting, one person dead, 4 people hurt in this shooting, and those who were injured were taken to Grady, which is, of course, the only level 1 hospital here in the metro area. Let's take a listen. I believe this is a doctor from Dr. Robert Jansen, who is Grady Health System's Chief Medical Officer. Let's take a listen.
So I think everybody's aware that we had a mass shooting down the street. 4 injured people were brought here. No other injuries occurred that we know of, and nobody was taken to the other facility. The 4 that were brought here, 3 are critical. 1 is still in the emergency department. The others are upstairs being treated. 2 in the operating room, and 1 in what's called interventional radiology.
Are you able to describe, I know there are HIPAA laws, are you able to describe who shot?
No, I can't give out that information, I'm sorry.
How is Grady prepared to handle a mass shooting situation?
So we called mass casualty event. Within minutes, we had multiple trauma surgeons, multiple staff in the trauma bay itself. We cleared out any patients who were currently in the Marcus Trauma Center, and we were fully prepared. We were anticipating up to 12 patients. Fortunately, we only received 4, but we were completely prepared for it. We had all the staff that we needed. We had all the ancillary staff that we needed. We had chaplains there. We had security there. Everyone that was needed was in the place. Yes. Yes. We have stopped our mass casualty call now, but we are prepared. We initially stopped visitors because we weren't sure what the shooter is. We are confident now that we can let visitors back in. We never locked the hospital down. We just wanted to stop visitors just in case there was anything going on. I'm sorry, I couldn't. Yeah. So when we activate our mass casualty event, that immediately starts our command center. We bring all the surgeons, all the nurses, all the ancillary staff to the trauma center itself. It goes out over both remotely through phones as well as announced over the loudspeaker. And then we start clearing out operating rooms, and we start clearing out the emergency department in case we need additional space.
I know you can't give a lot of information like identify, but can you tell us if these are adults, children, any age ranges?
They're all adults.
Any genders?
No, I don't have that. We know that a couple of families are here, but I don't know about the other ones.
You said originally you were preparing for 12.
Yes.
The original call come in that there might be 12 coming?
That's what we heard initially, but I think in any of these situations, there's a lot of confusion, as you know.
Thank you. You guys updated.
So I'm Robert Jansen, I'm the chief medical officer.
Thank you, guys.
And you've been listening to Grady Health System's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Robert Jansen, giving us an update on the patients taken to Grady. Of course, they are a level 1 trauma center. They treat gunshot wounds among many other severe injuries. He told us 4 injured brought to Grady, 3 of them
All
right
right,
now
so
in
that's that. So yeah, Atlanta's crazy right now, but that's not what y'all came here for. We fixing to talk about this Federal Reserve Report. Now, there are rumblings that they're going to raise the interest rates up 0.25% to 5.75. So let's see if they're going to announce this. We just waiting for them to start. Oh shit, he already looked pissed.
Good afternoon. Before discussing today's meeting, let me comment briefly on recent developments in the banking sector. Conditions in that sector have broadly improved since early March, and the U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
You
We
just
will
lost
continue
a
to
bank a
monitor
couple days
conditions
ago,
in
you
the sector.
liar.
We're committed to learning the right lessons from this episode and will work to prevent events like these from happening again. As a first step in that process, last week we released Vice Chair for Supervision Barr's review of the Federal Reserve's supervision and regulation of Silicon Valley Bank. The review's findings underscore the need to address our rules and supervisory practices to make for a stronger and more resilient banking system, and I'm confident that we will do so. From the perspective of monetary policy, our focus remains squarely on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I understand the hardship that high inflation is causing, and we remain strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. Today, the FOMC raised its policy interest rate by 0.25 percentage point. Since early last year, we've raised interest rates by a total of 5 percentage points in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time.
Move this man!
We're also continuing to reduce our securities holdings. Looking ahead, we'll take a data-dependent approach in determining the extent to which additional policy firming may be appropriate. I will have more to say about today's monetary policy actions after briefly reviewing economic developments. With real GDP rising at a below trend pace of 0.9%. The pace of economic growth in the first quarter of this year continued to be modest at 1.1%, despite a pickup in consumer spending. Activity in the housing sector remains weak, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. The labor market remains very tight. Over the first 3 months of the year, job gains averaged 345,000 jobs per month. The unemployment rate remained very low in March at 3.5%. Even so, there are some signs that supply and demand in the labor market are coming back into better balance. The labor force participation rate has moved up in recent months, particularly for individuals aged 25 to 54 years. Nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, and job vacancies have declined so far this year. But overall, labor demand still substantially exceeds the supply of available workers. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%. Over the 12 months ending in March, total PCE prices rose 4.2%. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 4.6%. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year. Nonetheless, inflation pressures continue to run high, and the process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. At today's meeting, the committee raised the target range for the federal funds rate by a 1/4 percentage point, bringing the target range to 5 to 5.25%. And we're continuing the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. With today's action, we have raised interest rates by 5 percentage points in a little more than a year. We are seeing the effects of our policy tightening on demand in the most interest rate sensitive sectors of the economy, particularly housing and investment. It will take time, however, for the full effects of monetary restraint to be realized, especially on inflation. In addition, the economy is likely to face further headwinds from tighter credit conditions.
And folks, don't white people lost their mind
in response to our policy actions and a softer economic outlook. But the strains that emerged in the banking sector in early March appear to be resulting in even tighter credit conditions for households and businesses.
Thanks.
These tighter credit conditions are likely to weigh on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. The extent of these effects remains uncertain. In light of these uncertain headwinds, along with monetary policy restraint we've put in place, our future policy actions will depend on how events unfold. In determining the extent to which additional policy firming may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments. We will make that determination meeting by meeting based on the totality of incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation. And we are prepared to do more if greater monetary policy restraint is warranted. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep our longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a period of below-trend growth and some softening of labor market conditions. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Gina.
Hi, Gina Smilek, New York Times. Thanks for taking our questions. I wonder if you could tell us whether we should read the statement today as a suggestion that the committee is prepared to pause interest rate increases in June. And I also wonder if the Fed staff has in any way revised their forecast for a mild recession from the March minutes. And if so, what a recession like what they're envisioning would look and feel like when it comes to, for example, the unemployment rate.
So, taking your question, of course, today our decision was to raise the federal funds rate by 25 basis points. A decision on a pause was not made today. You will have noticed that in the statement from March, we had a sentence that said the committee anticipates that some additional policy firming may be appropriate. That sentence is not in the statement anymore. We took that out, and instead we're saying that in determining the extent to which additional policy firming may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account certain factors. So that's a meaningful change that we're no longer saying that we anticipate. And so we'll be driven by incoming data, meeting by meeting, and we'll approach that question at the June meeting. So the staff's forecast is so. Let me start by saying that that's not my own most likely case, which is really that the economy will continue to grow at a modest rate this year. And I think that's so different people in the committee have different forecasts. That's my own assessment of the most likely path. Staff produces its own forecast, and it's independent of the forecasts of the participants, which include the governors and the Reserve Bank presidents, of course. And we think this is a healthy thing, that the staff is writing down what they really think. They're not especially influenced by what the governors think, and vice versa. The governors are not taking what the staff says and just writing that down. So it's actually good that the staff and individual participants can have different perspectives. So broadly, the forecast was for a mild recession, and by that I would characterize as one in which the rise in unemployment is smaller than has been typical in modern era recessions. I wouldn't want to characterize the staff's forecast for this meeting. We'll leave that to the minutes, but broadly similar to that.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Thanks for taking our questions. I'm wondering if you can talk about the account of possible effects of a debt limit standoff. You've said repeatedly that the ceiling must be raised, but do you see any economics effects of even getting close to a default? And what type of situation would that look like?
So I wouldn't want to speculate specifically, but I will say this. These are fiscal policy matters for starters, and they're for Congress and the administration, for the elected parts of the government to deal with, and they're really consigned to them. From our standpoint, I would just say this: it's essential that the debt ceiling be raised in a timely way, so that the U.S. government can pay all of its bills when they're due. A failure to do that would be unprecedented. We'd be in uncharted territory.
Please let it happen so Biden can look
dumb. The U.S.
dumb.
economy would be highly uncertain and could be quite averse. So I'll just leave it there. We don't give advice to either side. We just would point out that it's very important that this be done. And the other point I'll make about that, though, is that no one should assume that the Fed can protect the economy from the potential, short and long-term effects of a failure to pay our bills on time. It would be so uncertain that it's just as important that we never get to a place where we're actually talking about or even having a situation where the U.S. government's not paying its bills.
And just to follow up, was discussion around the uncertainty of a possible standoff, did that affect today's monetary policy decision at all?
I wouldn't say that it did. It was, of course, it's something that came up. We talk a lot about risks to the outlook, and that come up. A number of people did raise that as a risk to the outlook. I wouldn't say that it was important in today's monetary policy decision yet.
Steve.
Oh, thank you. Can you tell us what the Federal Reserve Board did in the wake of that February presentation where you were informed that Silicon Valley Bank and other banks were experiencing interest rate risks? And can you tell me what supervisory actions you've done in the wake of the recent bank failures to make sure that banks are currently appropriately managing interest rate risk? And kind of part three, but it's all the same question here. Do you still think this separation principle, that monetary policy and supervision can be handled with different tools? Thank you.
Sure. So the February 14th presentation, I didn't remember it very well, but now, of course, I've gone back and looked at it very carefully. I did remember it. And what it was a general presentation. It was an informational briefing of the whole board, the entire board. I think all members were there. And it was about interest rate risk in the banks and lots of data. And there was one page on Silicon Valley Bank, which talked about, the amount of losses mark-to-market losses they had in their portfolio. There was nothing in it about, that I recall anyway, about the risk of a bank run. So it was, I think the takeaway was they were going away to do an assessment, a horizontal assessment of banks. It wasn't presented as an urgent or alarming situation. It was presented as an informational, non-decisional kind of a thing. And I thought it was a good presentation. And as I said, did remember it. In terms of what we're doing, of course, I think banks themselves are many banks are now are attending to liquidity and taking opportunity now, really since the events of early March to build liquidity. You asked about the separation principle. Like so many things, it's very useful, but ultimately it has its limits. I mean, I think in this particular case, we have found that the monetary policy tools and the financial stability tools are not in conflict. They're working well together. We've used our financial stability tools to support banks through our lending facilities. And at the same time, we've been able to use our monetary policy tools to foster maximum employment and price stability.
I don't mean to be argumentative, but the staff report said SVB has significant interest rate risk. It said interest rate risk measurements failed at SVB, and it said banks with large unrealized losses face significant safety and soundness risk. Why was that not alarming?
Well, I mean, I didn't say it wasn't alarming. It was.
This man is like this on the inside.
They're working on
after that question.
They're on the case. I'm not sure they actually did mention that they had taken regulatory action, or supervisory action in the form of matters requiring attention. So I think that was also in the presentation. I think it was to say, yes, this is a bank, and there are many other banks that are experiencing these things, and we're on the case.
Thank you.
Go to Victoria.
Hi, Chair Powell. I wanted to ask you, obviously, with the recent bank turmoil, we've seen multiple banks buy other banks. And I was just curious whether you think that further consolidation in the banking sector would increase or decrease financial stability, and whether you have any concerns about the biggest bank in the U.S. Getting even larger.
We certainly don't. And I don't have an agenda to further consolidate banks. Consolidation has been a factor in the U.S. banking industry really since interstate banking, and before that even. It goes back more than 30 years. When I was in the government a while back, I think there were 14,000 banks. Now there are 4,000 and change. So that's going on. I personally have long felt that having small, medium, and large size banks is a great part of our banking system. The community banks serve particular customers very well. Regional banks serve very important purposes, and the various kinds of GSIBs do as well. So I think it's healthy to have a range of different kinds of banks doing different things. I think that's a positive thing. Is it a financial? So I would just say, in terms of JP Morgan buying First Republic, the FDIC really runs the process of closing and selling a closed bank completely. That is their role. So I really don't have a comment on that process. As you know, there's an exception to the deposit cap for a failing bank. So it was legitimate. And I think the FDIC, I believe, is bound by law to take the bid that is the least cost bid. So I would assume that's what they did.
So do you have any concerns about the fact that they're getting larger in general?
So I think it's probably good policy that we don't want the largest banks doing big acquisitions. That is the policy, and but this is an exception for a failing bank, and I think it's actually a good outcome for the banking system. It also would have been a good outcome for the banking system had one of the regional banks bought this company, and that could have been the outcome. But ultimately, we have to follow the law in our agencies, and the law is it goes to the least cost bid.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the Financial Times. At the March meeting, you mentioned that tightening of credit conditions from the recent bank stress could be equal to one or more rate increases. So given developments since then, how has your estimate changed?
Yeah, I think I followed that up by saying it's quite impossible to have a precise estimate of the words to that effect. But in principle, that's the idea. When we've been raising interest rates, and that raises the price of credit, and that, in a sense, restricts credit in the economy, working through the price mechanism. And when banks raise their credit standards, that can also make credit tighter in a kind of broadly similar way. It isn't possible to make a kind of clean translation between one and the other, although firms are trying that, and we're trying it. But ultimately, we have to be honest and humble about our ability to make a precise assessment. So it does complicate the task of achieving, a sufficiently restrictive stance. But I think conceptually, though, we think that interest rates, in principle, we won't have to raise rates quite as high as we would have had this not happened. The extent of that is so hard these effects will be. We don't know how large they'll be and how long they'll take to be transmitted, but that's what we'll be watching carefully to find out.
Just to quickly follow up, what does it suggest about the scope for the committee to pause rate increases perhaps as early as next month, even if the data remains strong then, if it's having some kind of substitute effect?
This is just something that we have to factor in as we want to find ourselves. So I guess I would say it this way. The assessment of the extent to which additional policy firming may be appropriate is going to be an ongoing one, meeting by meeting, and we're going to be looking at the factors that I mentioned that they're listed in the statement, the obvious factors. That's the way we're going to be thinking about it. That's really all we can do. As I say, it does complicate. We have, a broad understanding of monetary policy. Credit tightening is a different thing. There's a lot of literature on that, but translating it into rate hikes is uncertain. Let's say it adds even further uncertainty. Nonetheless, we'll be able to see what's happening with credit conditions, what's happening with lending. There's a lot of data on that, and we'll factor that into our decision making.
Howard Schneider with Reuters. Thank you. So noting that the statement dropped the reference to sufficiently restrictive, I was wondering, given your baseline outlook, whether you feel this current rate of 5 to 5.25% is in fact sufficiently restrictive.
So that's going to be an ongoing assessment. We're going to need data to accumulate on that. Not an assessment that we've made. That would mean we think we've reached that point, and I just think it's not possible to say that with confidence now, but nonetheless, you will know that the summary of economic projections from the March meeting showed that at that point in time that the median participant thought that this was the appropriate level of the ultimate high level of rates. We don't know that. We'll revisit that at the June meeting, and that's we're just going to have to. Before we really declare that, I think we're going to have to see data accumulating and make that, as I mentioned, it's an ongoing assessment.
A follow-up on credit. Could you give us a sense of what the SLUS survey indicated? It was already, I think 45% of banks were tightening credit as of the last survey. What did this one show, and how did that weigh into your deliberations?
So we're going to release the results of the SLUS on May 8th, in line with our usual time frame. And I would just say that the SLUS is broadly consistent when you see it with how we and others have been thinking about the situation and what we're seeing from other sources. You will have seen the Beige Book and listened to the various earnings calls that indicate that mid-sized banks some of them have been tightening their lending standards. Banking data will show that lending has continued to grow, but the pace has been slowing really since the second half of last year.
Go to Nick.
Nick Timmeros of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, the argument around the end of last year and the beginning of this year to slow down the pace of increases was to give yourself time to study the effects of those moves. After the bank failures in March, as you've discussed, the Fed staff projected a recession starting later this year. So my question is why it was necessary to raise interest rates today, or put differently, if the whole point of slowing down the pace was to see the effects of your moves, and now you've, for the last two meetings, been seeing the effects of those moves. Why did the committee feel it was necessary to keep moving?
Well, the reason is that again, with our monetary policy, we're trying to reach and then stay at for an extended period, a level of policy stance that's sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to 2% over time. And that's what we're trying to do with our tool. I think slowing down was the right move. I think it's enabled us to see more data, and it will continue to do so. So we really we have to balance. We always have to balance the risk of not doing enough and not getting inflation under control against the risk of maybe slowing down economic activity too much. And we thought that this rate hike, along with the meaningful change in our policy statement, was the right way to balance that.
And just to follow up, what you said in response to Howard's question, you'll need data to accumulate to determine if this is a sufficiently restrictive stance. Does that data need to accumulate, or could it accumulate over a longer period than a 6-week intermeeting cycle?
As I mentioned, I would just say that this assessment will be an ongoing one. You can't with economic data. You can't. You've seen take inflation from it. Look back. We've seen inflation come down, move back up 2 or 3 times since March of 2021. We've seen inflation have a few months of coming down and then come right back up. So I think you're going to want to see that that a few months of data will persuade you that you've got this right, kind of thing. And we have the luxury. We've raised 500 basis points. I think that policy is tight. I think real rates are probably that you can calculate them many different ways, but one way is to look at the nominal rate and then subtract a reasonable estimate of let's say 1-year inflation, which might be 3%. So you've got 2% real rates. That's meaningfully above what many people anyway, would assess as the neutral rate. So policy is tight, and you see that in interest sensitive activities, and you also begin to see it more and more in other activities. And if you put the credit tightening on top of that and the QT that's ongoing, I think you feel like we may not be far off, or possibly even at that level.
Thank you very much, Chair Powell. Edward Lawrence with Fox Business. So if the Federal Reserve gets down to the 3% inflation as the projections show at the end of this year, or close to it, would it be okay for you for a prolonged period of 3% inflation and hoping for some outside event to move down to 2% target?
I think we're always going to have 2% as our target. We're always going to be focusing on getting there.
Would be okay with a prolonged 3%?
Let me just say that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for inflation going down to 2% over time. I mean, that's not a question that's in front of us, and it would depend on so many other things. But ultimately, we're not looking to get to 3% and then drop our tools. We have a goal of getting to 2%. We think it's going to take some time. We don't think it'll be a smooth process, and I think we're gonna need to stay at this for a while.
How does the other side of the mandate, the job side, once you get to 3%, going from 3 to 2, how does the other side of the mandate balance?
I think they will both matter equally at that point. Right now, you have a labor market that's still extraordinarily tight. You still got 1.6 job openings, even with the lower job openings number, for every unemployed person. We do see some evidence of softening in labor market conditions, but overall, you're near a 50-year low in unemployment. Wages, you all will have seen the wage number from late last week, and it's whenever it was, and it's a couple percentage points above what would be consistent with 2% inflation over time. So we do see some softening. We see new labor supply coming in. These are very positive developments, but the labor market is very, very strong. Whereas inflation is running high, well above our goal. And right now, we need to be focusing on bringing inflation down. Fortunately, we've been able to do that so far without unemployment going up.
Bloomberg News. So many analysts noted at the time of the March FOMC meeting that at least half of Fed officials' projections did imply or seem to imply that a recession was in their baseline forecast as well.
I didn't know Hillary Swank was a lawyer. I'm sorry, a reporter. I did not know this.
And so I'm just wondering if you could kind of elaborate on, why you're optimistic that a recession can be avoided, given that that's the Fed staff's forecast.
I think, I know what's printed in the summary of economic projections and all that. I don't think you can deduce exactly what you said about what participants think, because you don't know what they were thinking for first quarter GDP at that.
All right, I'm about done. So there you go. Rates are going up 0.25%. So loans going up, credits going up, mortgages going up. Cost to do business is going to go up. Fun times, fun times. We would love to do that to our leaders, but can't do that, and that's Fed charge. We don't need Fed charges around here. So for the time being, we're just going to be on this.
Oh, you motherfuckers. Okay. All right. I'm putting cases on all you bitches.
Yeah. So I guess you guys can stay with the Atlanta active shooter situation. They still haven't found him. They know who he is. It's 24-year-old Deion Patterson. 24-year-old Deion Patterson. We're gonna do the family a favor and we'll show his picture. So if you are in the Atlanta area, they say don't approach him. Don't do it. That's him. That's him. But anyway, y'all, I'm going to get up out of here. I appreciate y'all staying with me on this. I know that was boring as hell, but you know, it is what it is. All right, y'all, take care. Stay safe out there. And you know what to do when the agitators of peace, like this piece of shit, mess with your existence.